Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's WRAD Chat. My name is Amber Peterson, and I'm the Director of Program Innovation for LitWorld. LitWorld is a nonprofit that strengthens kids and communities through the power of story. We partner with phenomenal community-based organizations all around the world to deliver literacy-based social-emotional programming for young people. Our World Read Aloud Day, or WRAD Chat series, is an opportunity for us to discuss and celebrate the amazing community that literature and storytelling can promote with some of LitWorld's amazing friends and partners. On this last Wednesday of Black History Month, our focus is on the necessity of hearing and having access to Black stories and on how literature can help us to have conversations about race and equity with young people. Our panelists today are amazing educators from two outstanding organizations. Hello, hello. Joining us are Erika and Duane. Dr. Erika D. Tate is the founder of Bluknowledge. Bluknowledge is a learning firm that advances equity through the design and study of learning experiences in schools and communities. Duane Davis is the Executive Director of K-12 and Education Initiatives and My Very Own Library out of the University of Chicago. My Very Own Library is a literacy initiative that provides access to books and learning resources for students in public elementary schools. I hope I got both of your titles and introductions correct. A warm welcome to both of you. We are so happy to have you with us here today. Let's start off by learning a little bit more about the amazing work that each of you does. So why don't we start with you, Erika? Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that Bluknowledge does and why you founded it?
Yes. So I founded it because I am just very passionate about community and learning. And so Bluknowledge does two things. So one, we provide organizations the opportunity to learn about the communities that they serve or the impact of the that the programs they provide have on communities. And then the other part is we work in the K through 12 frame, and we have a brand called LitWorld Learning, which really empowers educators and community and schools with professional learning that helps them deliver effective instruction. And we do that both in the space of digital learning and STEM. And so we just really try to make sure that within our community and our schools that students of all ages, right, have an opportunity to continue learning and to really embrace that power and to become lifelong learners.
Awesome. Duane, I hope you can hear me. Just thumbs up if you can hear me. It looks like you were frozen at some point, or we were frozen.
Well, thank you, Amber, and I'm very happy to be here today and to be here with Erika. And I'm lucky to learn more about her work because I know a lot of educators in that neck of the woods and like to connect with her after this. But before that, My Very Own Library recently in the past year and a half came to the University of Chicago. It's a program that's been around for 10 years, started in Newark, New Jersey. And it currently services over 80 elementary schools and one high school around the country in multiple states and even in the Dominican Republic. We work with schools for book access. So we do book fairs with our Scholastic partner, Scholastic Book Fairs, where most young people in the program get 10 free books a year. And so they get to choose those books. And in I would say a regular year, they would get 10 free books at a book fair. We've been doing book distributions during the pandemic. So delivering those books to the schools and then pairing up with other deliveries of services and needs to families, whether that they get books when they get a meal, they get books when they come up to pick up supplies, they get books when they come up just to connect with their schools and their teachers. We also do community and family engagement where we try to get local booksellers, local authors to visit our schools, talk to our young people and work with our young people. And we also do author engagements and author visits. So we can't do those visits currently in a pandemic. So what we currently do is we have a video program with My Very Own Library read alouds and author engagements on our YouTube channel. As far as myself, I've been an educator. This is my 25th year in education. I've been a middle school teacher, high school teacher, ran an English education program, worked at a community college, everything but management. Now I'm a manager, now I'm an administrator at university, but a teacher, an English teacher at heart, and a teacher of English teachers at heart, and particularly a teacher of writing. So just really excited to be here and have this conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Thank you for your years of educational service. And of course, we are all about the read aloud at LitWorld. But thank you guys both for being here and for offering your different and very important perspectives, I think, on education. So zooming into our questions here, there's been a lot of focus in recent years and especially right now, on the need for diverse perspectives in storytelling. Can each of you talk a little bit about why that perspective is important in the work that you do specifically?
Yeah, so I think about literacy in terms of the science space, so science literacy and STEM space, and thinking not just about reading and writing, but the knowledge and skills and practices that you have in terms of that. And so the way I have been doing it most of my life is thinking about how do we place science at the center of our lives. So in our personal stories and our local communities, and even in our global stories, science plays such an important part. Whether you're thinking about your human body, you're thinking about your health during this time, or the environment, science is part of our story, and we are part of the scientific story that gets told. And so work that I have done has thinking about how can we create science units that focus on local science. So I have done work in thinking about like asthma as a social justice issue, and doing it in a way that not only helps learners become like critical about the science being practiced in their lives, but also that they can contribute their local and personal stories about how it's, asthma or air pollution has affected them in their community. So that's one way, is really thinking about how do we tell the story of science in schools that includes the personal and community stories of our learners. And then the second part is we've had an opportunity to do like family STEM programs, which I'm really excited about. I'm an engineer turned educator, so I just love making things and more importantly, getting people to make things. And so we've had an opportunity to engage parents, and mostly African-American moms and grandmas, and completing STEM challenges with each other, and then going into their homes and being STEM leaders. And so I just think that when we think about storytelling, that is like a counter narrative. That is not always the story we hear about African-American women and their participation in science. But here they are learning and doing engineering challenges, and then going home to lead that. And so they become part of their kids' story. They bring STEM to their families. They are STEM leaders. When their kids tell the story about what they've done or what they've made, it includes their mama, grandmama, and some great grandma, and other family members. But I really just I think about like our lives are these stories that, we are living, and the people around us are also living these stories. And science does play a role. And if we can just show that we are already doing science, we are already practicing science, we are already feeling the impacts of that, and let those stories be shared aloud and be like the norm of what we learn in our classrooms and what we discuss in our families, then I do think we can, move forward in making this world a better place, and at least have fun making things.
Absolutely, absolutely. First, as a former scientist, so much of that resonates with everything you said resonates. But I also think that your point about kind of STEM literacy being an important type of literacy, and especially nowadays when we think about, just the relationship between healthcare and the Black community specifically, how important that literacy is, at every age. So kudos to you and that amazing work.
Yeah, I was giving snaps and all kinds of like, yes, I hear you. And so I'll start with my very own library, because that's my primary work, and it's really about the conversation about mirrors versus windows, right? So like you want students to see books, see themselves in the books that they get. You want to see characters that look like them, that go through their experiences. And what does access to those types of texts look like? And really having a conversation, not just in the city of Chicago, but in other cities and states we work in. How does that work with the public library? How does that work with the school? How does that work generationally? So I've had this conversation about generational literacy, very similar to what Erika spoke about, which is when you have, and our vehicle is, we work with schools, but our goal is to get books into people's houses, right? So we want books in the family. We want a third grader to read that book to their younger sibling. We want a middle school student to share or pass down a book to someone. And we, of course, would like to be in high schools, which is, people think about like literacy kind of ends there. No, high school students need books that they like, that they see themselves in, that they resonate with. And as an English major, never an engineer, but friends to lots of engineers, that the same thing, right? You want to see scientists that look like you. You want to see tech. You want to be able to have access to texts that are in your heritage language, right? So I work in the Dominican Republic, but in every city is to make sure that we have Spanish language books available to all of those families. But in Chicago, we need Mandarin, we need Polish, we need Spanish. We need to kind of have that range, because that we don't live in a monolinguistic culture, even though some of the frames and the spaces that people are in are monolinguistic. But I think the other part to that, and we've had conversations with creators about creative pipelines to storytelling in the same way. So how do we get access to the production of those texts and then get those texts to our young people? So when we work locally with local authors, there might be an independent, independently published author, but they have a great book. We had a community person, Sylvia Osborne, read an affirmation book she wrote for Black girls in pre-K called You Are, right? And like, that's awesome, right? Like, that's a person that works with schools in the community, that is a parent in our community, wrote a book for kids in our community, and interacted with our families and worked with our work. So, but I've also said in this time, clearly science literacy is one of the most important things in our current time, right? Masking what we understand or believe or trust about the vaccine and who's giving us that data and information, how we understand that data and information, how we synthesize it, and then how we apply it and spread it around our families. And I'll add another type of literacy, financial literacy. We have a wonderful financial literacy program at the University of Chicago. They have some cards called Talking Sense, and we're trying to integrate that in our community literacy as well, where we're talking about how you have those conversations about money, how you have those conversations about how you not just survive but thrive in the current economy that we have in our country. So definitely, who's telling the story, who controls the narrative, who's participating in the story is part of the basis of all work as far as literacy. And I say this last thing, scientists start as readers, right? Like they start as readers. So anytime there's a conversation about workforce development or STEM, I said it starts with the imagination and what's possible. And those possibilities start with stories.
Yes, absolutely. I think both of you bring up a very important question. That is kind of, what is the definition of literacy? And I think we often stop with this, like, oh, it's reading and writing, but it's so much more than that. There's so many different ways that we interact with the world and that we, read the world, that our definition definitely needs to expand to include all of those financial, scientific, all of those different ways that we, interact with life. So thank you guys for that. And then again, to your point about representation and how very, very important that is, and just allowing us all kind of that invitation into stories. This year in particular, and again, as we are in Black History Month, there's been, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, and after a year of very intense kind of racial reckoning here in the United States and elsewhere, the call for Black voices in storytelling specifically is very strong. Why do you think it's important for Black voices to come to the fore? And, why is it that, we have this call for it right now?
I think it's important to own your narrative, right? And so I just know from just being a kid in school, people tell you about your story so much and tell you about your experience. And you truly are the expert in your life, right? You live your experience here. And I think that when we have opportunities as Black men and women to share our experiences, to share our ideas, to share our stories, that really people get to understand not only what is really happening, but also kind of the breadth and the diversity of the reality of Black lives in this country and across the world. And so I think in as many spaces as possible when Black lives and Black people can come forward and tell their story and share their perspective and offer their insights and their ideas, right? All of those things are what allows for us to be reflective, be critical of the situation that we're in, but also bring forth solutions, bring forth actions that, change our circumstances and, like allow for us to thrive, right? Not just survive or make it through this next struggle, but really push forward and thrive and be celebrated.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's Erika is a hard act to follow. So I think what I could say is, the idea of social justice, right? The concept and the idea of equity, and equity being at the center of that, and that equity is not equality, and that the tried and true graphic that many educators and people that work in spaces have seen about the box. You give everybody the same box and that's equal, but it doesn't give everybody the same chance. And I think Erika mentioned the owning your narrative, and I look at it as, how do we get people into spaces where they can be their full selves? And what does that look like in schools? And what does that look like with young people? But also, what does that look like with adults? All right. What does that look like in the workplace? How can you bring your full self to a space and I would say not have to compromise, but to be who you are, and have your experiences be valued in that way. And when I think of young people in schools and education, I normally think of that as thinking about everybody as an asset. Everybody has assets, asset-based community development. Everybody brings something to the table, and we need to value what people bring to the table. And I say this along with this question, that I think we should all be working and thinking differently after this particular period of history is over for us in this country, right? That school should look different, work should look different. I think what we learned is that care is like the most important thing we give to other humans. And by care being important, that also means that I have to come to a space where I have to trust you and you have to trust me. And how do we get there if we don't see the humanity in everyone? And so if you don't consider me human, which has been the history of this country, is you wouldn't see a Black man a Black man as a human. And I'm a 6'6" Black man. So I'm normally a Black man that's considered my entire life. You don't play basketball? Like, oh, well, I'm closer to 50 now. Like, I'm just happy I can shovel the snow outside that's currently melting. But the idea being that you have to see my humanity in order to treat me as such. And that's really the challenge and struggle of our time. And our young people in our schools are places where this is where we transmit that knowledge. This is where people learn these spaces. And we have to really do a lot of internal work in order to properly bring that to young people, but also bring that to the adults that we deal with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's kind of a perfect segue into the next question, which is really kind of how do we talk about this with young people? As we celebrate Black culture and Black stories, it's impossible for us to ignore the traumatic histories of our experiences here in the United States and elsewhere, or the continued legacy of those experiences today. So how do we talk about race and equity with young people in ways that empower them and uplift them? And I'll let you answer that. There's more I could say. Go ahead.
I'll go first this time, so Erika can follow me and not take all the great points. I mean, I'll go first this time. So I said this to rooms full of educators to say that you have to be authentically who you are, right? Like you cannot, young people smell, taste, and see inauthenticity. They see fakeness very easily. So you have to be who you are. And what that also means is that you have to have your ear open and you have to listen to your young people. They're going to tell you what they're interested in. They're going to tell you how they feel about it. And you have to allow for the space for that. And the way we currently look at and think about school spaces, and I say school spaces from daycare centers through graduate school, through professional development, is that we look at them as spaces where we're trying to get to a pre and post test outcome. But what we're not looking at is how do we bring humans together into a room, agree on a set of norms, and figure out how to move forward and operate in that space, right? So this is student voice committees in schools. This is having what sometimes in some spaces are called democratic classrooms, and a small d democratic, meaning that we're here together. We have to learn how to work together, learn how to live together. And I have to hear what you're saying, respect what you're saying, and incorporate your lived life into the things that I present to you and make them applicable to what you can do out in the world. And kindergartners know how to say that as much as 8th graders and high school students and undergraduate students. So I think it's really about centering the humans in the room. Again, I say that a lot, and then listening to them and being open to hearing them, and then incorporating that into those spaces. And then it'll kind of take care of itself, because some of the narrative has been this narrative of loss and this deficit narrative, as opposed to a narrative that says, and you can go the entire other way. You can go kings and queens, but there is just the lived humanity of their own families, their grandparents, the city that they're in, the spaces that they're in.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's such an important point of that, so often we talk about equity conversations from a loss perspective and just the experiences of marginalized people from a loss perspective or a deficit perspective. So thank you for that.
No, I love it. I love the student voice committee and how the student voice is influencing the adults, right? And making it both a human centered space, but also learner centered. So that makes me happy. Yes, and I think I was telling Amber this a little bit earlier, that this idea of how do we talk with students came up in a project that I was working on. I'm advising. It's called ARISE. It's anti-racist science in education, and it's out of UC Berkeley. It's funded by the Hewlett Foundation, and it really is this idea of bringing teachers together to focus them on a science unit that's grounded in the community or grounded in our time, so that they can develop instructional practices for anti-racist science education. And I had a chance to attend the PD or professional learning and just be with teachers. And one of the concerns that kept coming up is, how do we talk about these challenges, whether it's asthma or COVID-19 or the inequitable implications of climate change? How do we talk about this with middle school students so that they don't feel like they're at a loss, or they don't feel like they're a deficit, or their world is doom and gloom? And we just, kept talking about it and thinking about how can we empower students. And one of these ideas that I still want to keep thinking about, because it's really important, is how do you help kids see their kind of sphere of influence? And so when you learn about an issue, what are those actions? Can you take an individual action and say, you know what, this conversation was really heavy. I mean, I'm glad that we had a chance to talk about race in the middle of my science classroom, but it's heavy. So what can I do to process that as a person who's I always think when I'm in a classroom talking where there's race, everyone's talking about my life, right? In all these different ways. And so how can I journal that, or how can I take what I learned and share it with my friends? I learned something very surprising, or I, didn't know my classmates felt this way. And just giving them these very concrete actions, but also being explicit about the scope and sphere of focus, so that I think it's important that they learn that there are multiple steps to making change, and they're all important. As adults who have lived and persevered right through challenges, when we get hit with something that's heavy, like this global pandemic and the impact of our community, we have to step back, right? How do we walk ourselves back to figure out where we can settle and what small changes we can make? And some of those changes are the care for ourselves, and some of those changes are the care for our family, as Duane was mentioning. And I just think if we can use our opportunities in schools and communities and in our own families to show like those small steps, I think it goes a long way, because what we can't control are challenges that are coming in the future, but we can teach. And I think about this with my own children. How do we cope with them and continue to persist and be positive, so that you feel like you can, be successful in this world by whatever that means for you, despite what others may think or despite what, opportunities you have, because that's how we continue to make it, I think. And but you can't just have those conversations in one part of your life. Like you were saying, when you got to show your whole self. How can you show up and be all that you are? And school has to change for that to happen.
Yeah, let me jump in, Amber, because Erika said something that I think just resonated with me greatly, which is, where it's the spaces that these conversations aren't happening, right? And it's the spaces where that there may not be a person of color, there may not be a BIPOC person, there may not be an indigenous person. And I think that's like the important part. You might have seen a meme about Black history is American history, that this is a month we highlight the particular culture and heritage, but that those conversations are conversations that are weaved into the fabric of this country. Like the history of this country is based in that. And so with that being the case, like, how's this conversation happening in Beloit, Wisconsin, just to randomly pick or Topeka, Kansas, or, like these other spaces where the people that represent that may not be there, but the conversation still needs to be had, because that same idea is there. It's people's humanity. And how do you look at their humanity? And then how do you affirm or assign to that when you're in those spaces? And it's if you look at those political maps, you see the coast are blue and the center is red. But the idea is that there are pockets and there are people that you might be dehumanizing and you don't realize it because your perspective doesn't come to that table, which we can circle back around the books. Well, what are you reading? What are you watching? There's so many choices right now, things to read and watch. And how do we look at that differently and give access to that, and also be realistic about that too, and have those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's often almost two different conversations when we talk about having these race and equity conversations with young people. One that comes from, BIPOC people, from people who are marginalized, and what those conversations look like. Because I know for a lot of minority people, those conversations start very early. There's never not having those conversations. And then another for people who don't identify in those ways, and maybe aren't experiencing, the effects of these systems in the same way. How is that conversation happening there? And to your point, like it's not just something that affects one group or the other group; it affects all of us. And I think if 2020 has shown us nothing, it is that it affects all of us, and it'll come out in some way or another. There's a question here that I want to pull up. It's a little bit long, so we'll read through it and then we'll take it down. But authenticity is truly key, and yet we have to be able to be authentic in spaces where others may see our authenticity as threatening. Your advice on keeping others engaged in these discussions when our genuine anger at their anti-intellectual postures merit authentic responses. Beautifully written, but I think the key here is, like, how do we respond to that anger? That justified, and a lot of times, anger that comes up with these conversations.
Erika, I'll let you go first, because I would say there's a science. Now I'm going to start talking. So I think that when I talk, I prefer English teachers and history teachers because I am one, and it's normally a very easy segue to have that kind of conversation because the content dictates it, right? Like, you can talk about the history of science. You can talk about, and I know there are ways to do it because I've also taught science and math, but I'm an English and history teacher by trade. And I think what I hear in that question is that how do we come to community? How do we end up in this space to have this conversation? And if we are having a conversation where you can bring your full self to the conversation, and I can bring my full self to the conversation, and we're colleagues or co-workers, or we inhabit the same space, then just as you might say something that might anger me, right, that might make my blood boil, do we have enough community, have enough trust been built so that I can respond in kind or respond and de-escalate the situation, but also rationalize to you here's how you sound to me. So it's the kind of Socratic seminar, right? Mm-hmm. Like, here, I'm going to summarize how you sound to me and what you said to me. And here's my rational response, and then here's my personal response. Mm-hmm. And we don't have a lot of meta conversation inside of, because we don't usually give ourselves time to do that. That is my response.
Yeah. I think, and what you're talking about, it comes over time and with trust. But sometimes you don't have that opportunity. I think about when you start in the classroom, and if you really want RAISE to be a conversation throughout your school year or throughout your year, like if you're in a community organization, you're going to start having that conversation before you're comfortable with each other. And I always think, it's important to just honor that, like, race, as much as we intellectualize it in our school places and give it all these very big names, right? When we talk about it, it is really an emotional issue. Like, when you do something that says that I am not human enough, when you don't include me in your books, in your history, like when you have policies that just continually over time affect the generations of my family in an unfair way, I am going to be angry about that. That upsets me and it hurts my feelings. And I don't know the answer to this, but I just think, like, how do we give, like, space for and like recognition that this is an emotional issue, and so of course we should be able to share without hurting, but also like create the space to hurt and create the space to be angry about injustice, which I feel, is like a proper response. Now, how you carry out that anger, right, that's different, but feeling it, not feeling it forever, but feeling it and making sure that you can fuel it in a way that is productive is important. But you have to learn to do that. And so if we don't ever have conversations where we have emotions there, and how do we learn how to figure it out? How do we learn how to engage kids around it? I mean, this is just me. I do not know how to solve this without paying for years of therapy or something. But if we don't make emotion part of the conversation, we'll never learn as a people, as a country, to have these conversations with those who aren't sharing the same experience as us. And I think that's what makes it so hard. And it takes time, right? For if Duane says something to me and it makes me angry and me to go, I'm not going to be angry back. That is not going to happen. We just met 3 minutes ago, right? It takes time. And so we have to, it's a long journey and try to figure that out. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just, I love when there's I love the push for these conversations. Like, I think this definitely more than when I was in school, we weren't having these conversations. So it's great to see young people engaged in it. And sometimes it's going to be wonderful and reflective and enlightening. And sometimes it's going to be off. But if we can learn from it and keep sharing and keep having this discussion, we're going to get there. It's just going to take us some time.
Absolutely. I think to both of your points, I think we need to figure out as a culture, as a community, as a world, how to be a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable, because these are emotional conversations. We can't take emotion out of them as we have them. So, I'm looking at the time here. We are at 2:36, which is a little bit past our moment. So I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. And maybe just to kind of close out, I know both of you have a wealth of experiences and resources. What are some of your favorite stories to share with young people? Do you have any favorite texts or authors or recommendations?
Well, I have a 1 and 3-year-old, so so I'm excited to be here. I have just truly loved reading with them and just discovering stories that I never had when I was a kid. And so, like, I have a girl who's 3, and so we've been reading like I Am Enough by Grace Byers ever since she was little, and just like seeing all those little Black girls and represented differently, and then being like, I am enough, which I definitely taught my child to say, has been wonderful. And we love like the Lola Reads and Leo Reads series by like Anna McQuinn, because that's like our family, like Catherine, my daughter, Lola, the big sister, and she definitely thinks that Leo is Elijah, my son, and so we love that. And of course, you know, I love some Ada Twist, right? I mean, just a little Black girl asking questions of the world. I'm like, yes. So those are like my favorites, and I think they can be enjoyed beyond toddler life. But I love that I never had those books, and I just think it's great that they're there, and we can have conversations about these kids, and they look like them, and they see themselves, and they're on, you know, they're kids just doing everyday things. And so I appreciate that. And like the work, Duane, that you're doing to bring those books to families. Oh man, that's wonderful, because representation, it's really great to be able to say, yes, you want me to do your ponytails like Lola?
Right. Yep.
Love that. Love those suggestions.
Yeah, so I live with a soon to be 18-year-old. My son is finishing his high school in a pandemic from the house with his dad. My wife is an elementary school principal in Chicago Public Schools. So education is our business. Education is our life. We're all experiencing that in this way. And so the first thing I thought of when I got this question was the story that I've taught every single student I've ever taught, no matter what I've been teaching, is Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin. I mean, you can read anything by James Baldwin, which is timeless. He's a memeable. He has many quotes that he generated in the 50s and 60s and 70s and that still apply today. But Sonny's Blues is a story of two brothers, one that's a teacher and one that's had some challenges in his life. And it's a great story. It's the first story I ever taught when I taught 8th grade. So I just love that story, and I teach it every time I get an opportunity to do that. I'm going to shout out some graphic novels and comic books, because I think there's some great stories being told. Eve Ewing had a run where she was doing Ironheart, which is the young girl of color who has an Iron Man suit. Nnedi Okorafor did the comic run for Shuri, so that's Black Panther's sister, who is a genius scientist. And Nnedi is an Afrofuturist writer and a friend from college. And so I think the idea of graphic novels and stories and visual literacy and how images and words impact each other are just really important. And then one other thing that we're working on right now, reading Isabel Wilkerson's work, Warmth of Other Suns, Encased, because that's also great reporting, great anthropology, great history, great research. And I think anybody can find access in those stories, really middle school and up, even if you segmented it and think about that. But those are the things I'm currently reading and interacting with.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. You've been amazing and offer such a wealth of information and expertise. For more information about Bluknowledge, you can go to bluknowledge.com. For more information about my very own library at uchicago.edu. And I know, Duane, there are a series of events and conversations that are coming up on your end as well, that people should 100% check out. So we will leave more information about both of the panelists and their organizations in the descriptions for this conversation. Of course, make sure that you are following LitWorld, litworld.org, and also, of course, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter for more amazing conversations just like this one. Until next time, thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.